Hello everyone! Gul'dan is one of the warlords in Warlords of Draenor, but our Gul'dan already created a legendary story, and considering that he's my favorite warlord, I thought it'd be fun to take a look at his story from our reality. Keep in mind, the Gul'dan story is quite big, so I might not be able to tell you all the little details, but I will do my best. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the story of Gul'dan. When Gul'dan found out that the Draenei were hiding on Draenor, he figured that sending his burning legion to kill them was not the best option. He had tried this many times before, and every time the Draenei managed to escape his wrath, and this time he figured that a more subtle plan was required. Instead of sending his legion, he decided to use the race of orcs already present on Draenor. He manipulated the shaman Ner'zhul by sending him a vision of his deceased mate Rokan, and convinced him that the Draenei were plotting against the orcs. To the orcs, the ancestors, they were revered, and their wisdom was highly respected, so they trusted their words and they started to train and fight the Draenei. Over time, Ner'zhul realized that something wasn't quite right. Gul'dan had shown himself in his true form, which looked very similar to the Draenei, and Ner'zhul no longer felt joy while serving his beautiful being. He now felt fear, and he distrusted Gul'dan, so one night he rode out to Oshu'gan to communicate with the ancestors. When he arrived at the mountain, he tried to communicate with the ancestors to ask them for guidance and wisdom, but to his dismay, the ancestors turned their back on him. He had led the orcs down a path they should have never taken, and Gul'dan had not the best intention for their people. He had deceived Ner'zhul and the orcs, played them like puppets, and Ner'zhul realized that it was all his fault. On his way home, he tried to think of plans to mitigate the damage and perhaps turn things around, but his apprentice Gul'dan had followed his master, and he had learned everything that Ner'zhul had found out. He knew that Ner'zhul was about to betray Gul'dan. He had informed the Glorious One on everything, and Gul'dan, he was disappointed, he was mad at Ner'zhul, but he didn't strike the orc down. He let him stay and see what would happen to his people, as Gul'dan took Ner'zhul's place into following Gul'dan's orders. There was no need for deception when it came to Gul'dan. All Gul'dan required was the promise of more power to lead his people into darkness. First order of business was to appoint someone to lead the orcs, while Gul'dan kept himself busy with more important matters. The orc perfect for this job was Blackhand, first war chief of the Horde, who ruled the orcs, while in truth, behind the curtains, Gul'dan was actually the one in charge. He had his own shadow council with carefully selected members that would decide the best course of action for the Horde, and the best course of action in Gul'dan's mind was to get him more power. Blackhand believed that Gul'dan entrusted all his secrets to him, that they were equals in power, but Blackhand was nothing more than Gul'dan's puppets. Next, they had to find a way to increase the powers of their shamans. The elements on Draenor, they'd realized that finding the Draenei was not the right thing to do, so they'd refused to aid the shamans with their powers. To compensate, Gul'dan and Blackhand, they presented the orcs with a new source of power given to them by the beautiful beings who had already done so much to help them. The first Orcish warlocks were created, wielding fell magic, controlling demons, dealing devastating damage to the Draenei. They even used their life-draining powers to magically age the children of the orcs, so that their fighting numbers would quickly increase. Now, as all of this happened, as you might imagine, this did not happen overnight. Now, not all the orcs, they agreed with all these changes. Some of them, like Gul'dan for example, they actually spoke out against it. But the majority of the orcs, they followed willingly. Gul'dan was sickened by the approval of these demonic powers, but even he allowed his shamans to learn these arts to keep his people safe. They no longer had the elements on their side, so they had to do something to defend themselves against the Draenei. And besides that, going against the will of the Horde would mean exile and almost certain death. Now, even with their new powers, even after uniting in a single horde as a single force, Gul'dan realized that they still required more power to take on the Draenei. He was thinking about a solution, and a brilliant yet crazy idea came to mind. He told Blackhand that he and his clan should ride out and recruit ogres into their ranks. Ogres and orcs, they've been enemies for as long as they could remember, so this idea just to come up with it was insane. But Gul'dan managed to convince Blackhand. If Blackhand would be able to pull this off, then he would just add more glory to his name, and it would convince those who said that Blackhand's election as war chief was not completely fair. The Black Rock clan, they rode out in force, and they negotiated with the dumb but powerful ogres. They found out that the ogres, they were actually enslaved by the Grun, and in exchange for food, weapons, no longer getting beaten, and the promise of smashing Draenei, the ogres, they willingly agreed to join the ranks of the Horde.
Me smash you!
Not all orcs had given themselves completely to the new way of the Horde, and some of them saw themselves as shamans, and a few of them even tried to communicate with the ancestors. Gul'dan could not risk the ancestors informing anyone about their true intentions, so he traveled to the mountain of Oshugan, and he had his warlocks seal it with dark, powerful magic, preventing anyone from entering. This meant that the spirits of the ancestors were now trapped, that there was no way of communicating with them anymore, and that there was no way for the orcs to return to their former days. One by one, the cities of the Draenei fell. Even the holy place known as the Temple of Karabor was not able to stand against the might of the Horde. However, the one Kil'jaeden desperately wanted to kill, Prophet Velen, the leader of the Draenei, he had so far been able to stay out of their clutches. Only one major city remained to be taken, the city of Shefrev, but Kil'jaeden, he had one last gift for the orcs before they would take the city. All the clans were summoned to the area we now call the Throne of Kil'jaeden. Gul'dan had sent them all a letter, and he had given Ner'zhul the task of spreading the word. Unknown to Gul'dan was that Ner'zhul had not lost all of his fighting spirit just yet, and he dared to write a small message to Durotan, warning him not to accept this gift that was about to be presented to them. On the mountaintop, Gul'dan, he showed them the Cup of Unity, filled with demonic blood poured earlier into a pool by the Pit Lord Manoroth. This blood would indeed give the orcs incredible powers, and it would make their eyes burn fiery reds, but in exchange they would become slaves to the Legion. Now Durotan, he was warned beforehand not to take this gift. His longtime friend Orgrim Doomhammer, he was wise enough to stay away from it on its own, but other orcs did not see the dangers. Gromar's Hellscream of the Warsong clan was the first to step up and embrace this gift. Now fire pumped in his veins, a mad lust for killing took hold of his body, and many of the orcs followed in his footsteps. Now they were ready. Now they had all the power needed to take the final city of the Draenei and eradicate them once and for all. From a distance, Kil'jaeden and Manoroth, they observed the slaughter, and they figured that their mission was complete. Surely there was no way that Velen could have escaped this slaughter, so they abandoned the planet and they left the orcs to their fate. What they didn't know was that Velen and some of his people, they had evacuated the city and they had left some of their people behind to make it look like they were all killed. Velen grieved over sending so many people to their deaths, but the Naru assured him that he was needed for something greater. The Draenei and their leader, they would face some hard times in the marsh, but the orcs, they would do no better. The use of fel magic and the corruption from the Legion had not only corrupted the orcs and turned them green, had it also corrupted the land. It was now a very dry land. Food was limited, water was polluted, and the orcs, they started to fight each other because the demon blood was still pumping in their veins and they simply had to strike out. Over the years, more and more voices, they rose up pointing fingers to those who led them down this path. Gul'dan, he was feeling the rope tightening around his neck, and worst of all that promised power from Kil'jaeden had proved to be nothing but a big bag of air. The orcs, they might have perished on their planet, was it not for Sargeras who had need of them. Sargeras, he is the leader of the Burning Legion, the whole reason why Kil'jaeden turned evil and wanted his former friend dead, and Sargeras had managed to infiltrate the body of the Guardian Medivh. The Guardians, they're actually Azeroth's major defense against the Legion, so Sargeras had managed to infiltrate a powerful position and he used it to weaken the world and get it ready for an invasion. He made contact with Gul'dan and he showed him a world ripe for the taking. Water, food, plenty of humans to give the orcs a good fight. Gul'dan and his people, they had Azeroth as a promise and they worked on Draenor to create a portal, while Medivh, under the influence of Sargeras, made the portal on Azeroth.
I am grateful for your aid, champions. Now, Gul'dan's horde will sweep across this world like a locust swarm, and all my designs, all my carefully laid plans will at last fall into place.
With a sacrifice of a Draenei child found by the orcs, the portal was activated on Draenor's side and it was connected to Azeroth. A connection that lasts to this day. Now the orcs' invasion did not instantly happen. They didn't conquer the whole of the world in a single day. Some very important things happened between the orcs' arrival and the fall of Stormwind. First of all, the orc Gul'dan I, she made her way to the Tower of Karazhan to trade information and be a link between the humans and the orcs. Gul'dan was actually created by Gul'dan by forcing an orc and a Draenei to mate with each other. He then tortured her, he placed magical spells on her mind that made sure that she would remain obedient, he trained her in the ways of an assassin, and she became his spy, an informant with a mission to gather information and report back to Gul'dan. What Garona didn't expect was that she felt a conflict of allegiance. She was half orc, half Draenei, and at the time she actually believed she was half orc, half human, so she didn't fit in with her own people, but neither would she ever fit in with the humans. She did feel some sort of trust for the old Medivh, they even had a child together, but that's a whole different story on its own. The point is, at one point Garona stopped reporting to Gul'dan and instead placed her loyalty with the humans. Over time, Medivh apprentice Khadgar, he would figure out that it was actually Medivh who had brought the orcs to Azeroth. He collected Garona, he collected Anduin Lothar, and together they struck out at Medivh and they actually managed to take him out. When Khadgar stabbed his former mentor, the spirit of Sargeras slowly started to appear, but Anduin Lothar, he chopped off his head before he was able to materialize. This took care of the initial threat of the Guardian and Sargeras, but the orcs, they were already on Azeroth and their invasion was picking up. The King of Stormwind, Elaine, father of Varian Rin, he believed that Stormwind could hold.
The clans are united under Black Hand in this assault. They will stand together until Stormwind has fallen.
Mortals before the coming of the end.
Gul'dan is bringing up his warlocks by nightfall. Until then, the Blackrock clan will be trying to take the eastern wall.
1,000 deaths. We will hold until the reinforcements come. As long as men with stout hearts are manning the walls and the throne, Stormwind will hold.
The Orc leaders agree with your assessment.
By helping them with Medivh, Garona had earned her spot at Stormwind's court. They trusted her, but the magical spells placed on her minds, they were activated by the ogre Cho'Gall. Cho'Gall was one of Gul'dan's greatest allies and his apprentice, and Garona was forced to take out the king. With the king fallen, Stormwind fell as well, and their citizens, they were forced to set sail towards the kingdom of Lordaeron to warn them about the coming threat of the Hordes. Meanwhile, things didn't exactly stand still for the Horde either. Durotan, he had decided that enough was enough. He saw how Gul'dan had sacrificed a child to get him to Azeroth, and he realized that something had to be done. He spoke out against Gul'dan, which at the time did nothing, but it did get his clan exiled out of the Hordes. This was a clear sign to Durotan that what he knew about Gul'dan was the absolute truth, and he could not sit by and let his fellow orcs remain under Gul'dan's control. He met with his longtime friend Orgrim Doomhammer, who actually welcomed Durotan, he welcomed Draka, and their newborn son Thrall at his campfire. Durotan told his friends everything he knew, the bargain that Gul'dan had made with the Demon Lord, the obscene nature of Gul'dan's powers, the betrayal of the clans through the Shadow Council, the eventual and dishonorable end of the orcs who would be thrown as bait to the demonic forces. Orgrim listened closely, and if it had been anyone else to tell him this story, then he would have told them that they were crazy, but this was Durotan. He trusted Durotan with his life, and he promised his old friends that they would stand against Gul'dan, the betrayer. Now obviously, things were not safe for Durotan and Draka since they were exiled out of the Horde, so Orgrim, he sent one of his guards with them to escort them safely back. What they didn't realize was that this guard actually worked for Gul'dan, and from the bushes, Gul'dan's assassins took out Durotan, Draka, and even their escorts. They didn't kill their son though, they wanted Durotan to die with the knowledge that his son would be taken by the wild, but things would take a different path for young Thrall. Again, that's a different story for another time. The point is that his parents died, and Doomhammer knew that it was time to take action. He had always been loyal to his war chief Blackhand, but the corruption of Gul'dan could no longer be tolerated. He challenged Blackhand for the title of war chief, he took control over the Hordes, he murdered nearly all of the Shadow Council, and he waited for Gul'dan to wake up. He had to wait, since in the meantime Gul'dan was stuck in a coma. He'd been snooping around in Medivh's mind for the knowledge and the power that was promised, and right around that time, Lothar chopped off Medivh's head, and this didn't kill Gul'dan, but it did send him in a coma. When he woke up, he found Cho'Gall near him, and Cho'Gall was still loyal to him, but most of his pawns, they were removed from the board. Doomhammer was about to take Gul'dan's life, but Gul'dan was able to convince him to keep him alive, because even though Doomhammer hated warlocks, and especially Gul'dan, he did need them to fight the humans, their mages. On top of that, Gul'dan also promised Doomhammer more powerful troops. The first of the Death Knights were created, fallen human soldiers of Stormwind, imbued with magical spells, and souls from Gul'dan's warlocks were combined into one powerful being. Teron Gorfind was one of the first Death Knights created this way, and you might remember facing him in the Black Temple.
Death really isn't so bad.
Now naturally, all of this was just Gul'dan buying himself some time. He was in no way loyal to Doomhammer and in no way loyal to the Horde. In Medivh's mind, he had learned about the Tomb of Sargeras. This tomb was used by the guardian Aegwynn, Medivh's mother, to lock away the avatar of Sargeras. In the past, Sargeras had used this avatar to come down to Azeroth. He tried to take the world, Aegwynn defeated him, and she thought that that was the end of the story. What she didn't know was that Sargeras actually planned on getting killed, which he used to infiltrate her body. Aegwynn got pregnant, she gave birth to Medivh, and that's how Medivh got corrupted by Sargeras. Now the avatar itself remained on Azeroth, and the avatar contains a powerful artifacts, and especially the Eye of Sargeras was waiting in this tomb, and all Gul'dan had to do was wait for the right moment to strike. This moment came when the Horde assaulted the kingdom of Quel'Thalas and they battled with the High Elves. Quel'Thalas, they had magical stones around the city, which had great power in them, and Gul'dan convinced Doomhammer to allow him to experiment with these stones. He created an altar of storms, and he transformed ogres into ogre magi, loyal not to the Horde, but to Gul'dan. Doomhammer was foolish enough to let Gul'dan experiment more with these altars, since the ogre magi had proven to be extremely valuable in battle. He still did not trust the orc warlock, but he had to admit that Gul'dan's plans were aiding the Horde in the war against the Alliance, and this mistake would mean the downfall for the Horde. Instead of meeting up with the Horde at the siege of the capital city of Lordaeron, Gul'dan and Cho'Gall, they took their clans and they set sail to where the tomb was hidden beneath the waves. They used their magic to raise the tomb from the depths of the ocean, and some of Gul'dan's forces stayed outside of the tomb, while others followed him inside.
Quickly, you fools! Fan out and search for the primary passageway. We must reach the Chamber of the Eye before the tomb's guardians awaken. Spineless cowards! I said move! Now, Sargeras, I will claim whatever's left of your power and bring this wretched world to its knees. Blasted, feeble-minded weaklings. They're all likely dead by now. Still, I must press on. My power alone should be enough to... That laughter. Is that you, Sargeras? You seek to mock me? We'll see who laughs last, demon, when I claim your burning eye for my own. Ambushed by the Guardians. I am dying. If my servants had not abandoned me, I could have claimed the eye and... Damn you, Sargeras. I won't be beaten like this. I am Gul'dan. I am darkness incarnate. It cannot end like this.
This is as far as he got. The runes simply trail off. I cannot imagine what horrors Gul'dan faced in his final moments.
Doomhammer found out about Gul'dan's betrayal, and he split some of his forces to chase Gul'dan and bring him to justice. You have to understand that Orgrim was an orc of honor, and he could not allow such a dishonorable action to go unpunished. Splitting his forces did mean that they had to give up the siege of the capital city, and they were pushed back all the way to Blackrock Mountain, where they would lose the war of Azeroth, and the Dark Portal would be closed for the first time. Gul'dan's forces that he left outside were almost completely wiped out by the forces sent by Doomhammer, and Gul'dan himself, well, you saw what happened to him. His lust for power meant the end of his life as demons tore his body apart. Even in death though, Gul'dan played a massive role in several other stories in World of Warcraft, and just his skull had enough power to reopen the Dark Portal for a second invasion, to power up Illidan, which allowed him to take out Tichondrius, and who knows where Gul'dan's skull currently is. You can loot it as a trinket from Illidan, but I'm not certain if that's really part of the lore. Interesting fact though is that you can actually communicate with the skull of Gul'dan. It came into possession of Ner'zhul, it came into possession of Deathwing, Illidan had it in his hands, and in the books they described it as Gul'dan actually whispering to them. I wonder if he somehow manipulated Illidan, if he somehow influenced him, but I don't think they've ever confirmed this. All of Gul'dan's scheming and planning and just being an overall evil character is what makes Gul'dan my favorite warlord out of all of them. I'm not going to go into details as to what we already know is going to happen to a warlord. I want to keep this one spoiler free, and I've been going on for long enough. We'll cover that story when it's live. I will give you the hint that Gul'dan is going to play a massive part in the story, and I'm very happy that that's going to be. With that, I've reached the end of my video, so thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. Subscribe if you like my videos, and until next time, guys, see ya!
And what, Gul'dan, must we give in return? Everything.